disruptive.
Weird thing to happen. The clock is ticking. The gears are moving. Everything is back to work, ladies and gentlemen. Canada is on action, according to Mark Carney, stating that the premiers and I want to make Canada a global energy superpower and build the strongest economy in the G7. We're working together to break down trade barriers across the country and get big nation-building projects off the ground faster. That sounds good. You can't argue with that. You can't argue with, building a better economy, considering that Canada's on the rock bottom end of the spectrum, considering our GDP is basically gone and vanished from the rest of the developed nations. It seems like a good promise right there. But, when you're starting to do these nation-building projects and infrastructure and building all these housing, you're going to need a lot of people. So are they going to hire Canadians that are unemployed, considering the unemployment rate is skyrocketing? Are they going to reach out to, the most vulnerable citizens in the country to actually give them an olive branch into formulating to help build this country back to its formal roots? Nope. Because Mark Carney, let's not forget, Mark Carney serves the interests of the billionaire class. Mark Carney serves the interest of Century Initiative that they're pushing for mass immigration. So as they're announcing all this infrastructure building and how they want to bring more homes and how they want to, construct all these new nationwide building projects, not really pipelines, but they want to build all this new infrastructure. They bring in more migrants to use as slaves to build that infrastructure. Not Canadians, not hiring Canadians that could actually build upon the economy, but they're going to take more people in to an already struggling nation that we can't provide the services to our own people. You're going to bring in more people, announcing that they are needed to help build these jobs, to help build the economy. So, as Juno News points out, Canada took in 817,000 new immigrants in first 4 months of 2025. Remember, I thought Justin Trudeau, before he announced his resignation, that we were pausing immigration. I thought we're supposed to have this cap. I thought that, we made a mistake. We're going to pause. We're going to let communities and cities catch up. I thought we were supposed to have this pause until 2027. But no, look, 817,000 within the first 4 months of 2025. 817,000. That's like putting the population of Barrie, Ontario, times that by 4 or 5. Just in the first 4 months. And where are these people going to go? Again, towns and cities all across Canada cannot deal with this mass population boom at such an alarming rate. They can't deal with it. It's a simple mathematical situation. It's not race baiting to point this out. So, Canada's welcomed more than 800,000 new immigrants into the country through the first 4 months of 2025, according to the latest data from Statistics Canada. Between January and April, 132,000 people were granted permanent residencies, while 194,000 study permits and 491,000 work permits were finalized by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, reports Juno News. Again, those work permits, those study permits, we have discussed in extensive length that there is fraudulence, that they're exploiting the system, that corporations are pledging to bring these people on to advance their work permits, to advance their study permits, to exploit them for cheap labor. We know the scheme. We know the gimmicks. That's why they're allowed to get less than half a million people on work permits. That's why they're able to do this. And why they're able to do this while unemployment, the national unemployment, is continuing to boom. Young people, young students that are about to go on summer break, they can't get summer jobs. They can't get summer employment. They can't even work at Tim Hortons. Because Tim Hortons, owned by Restaurant Brands International, exploits these measures. Despite outlining a goal to return to sustainable levels of immigration in a mandate letter, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has so far continued to welcome newcomers at a high pace. The Liberal campaign promised to restrict the number of temporary workers and international students to 5% of the population while reducing annual permanent resident admissions to 1% of the population by 2027. So, even when they do a temporary pause, which I would argue is just full of crap. We knew that they were just going to cave at some point, and they're just going to allow, because NGOs, billionaires, they're pledging for this. They're pressuring politicians to advance this mass migration, to advance more immigrants. Look at the Century Initiative. Look at BlackRock. Look at George Soros. He wrote letters to these countries demanding that they need to take in more refugees. Why? Because the billionaire class wants to exploit the populations and exploit the immigration rates for their own gains. It has nothing to do with serving the needs of Canada, except serving the needs of the private equities and private companies that operate in exploiting these people, exploiting the immigrants, exploiting the workforce, exploiting Canadians. They're doing this intentionally. Based on Canada's current population of 40 million people, that number would equate to 2 million temporary foreign workers and international students, along with 400,000 permanent residents. Fraud, abuse, and massive backlogs now plague every immigration stream, with the unifying problem being unchecked inflow coupled with countless people living in the country without legal status. And that's why border protection agencies, why you heard whistleblowers at the CBSA demanding that they put legislation on, that they crack down on border crossings, because they can't keep up with this. You have 750,000 people showing up, crossing the border, flying into the country in less than 4 months. How do you expect agents that are already being bombarded with the mass amounts of migration, when they're getting cutbacks, when they're not funding proper border protection, how do you think they're going to deal with this? And just like what Bernie Sanders says, that open borders is a Koch brothers idea. It's the billionaire class. It's not a lefty idea. It's not a right ideology. It's the billionaire class. It's the billionaire class. It's the people that exploit these measures for cheap labor, for votes, for politics, and to exploit communities so that we have more of a population so they can control these populations. It's all for exploitive measures. Current immigration levels must be massively and immediately curtailed, according to Michelle Rempel Gardner, who posts on social media. So here is Michelle Rempel Gardner, who's MP for the Conservative Party. And she actually wrote an article on X here about all this, because she's been, the full force of having reform on immigration, how we need to have checks and balances. And as someone that is pro-immigrant, I'm not against, people coming into Canada and seeking new life if they're willing to go through the legal checkpoints and go through the proper procedures. I have no problem with newcomers. I have no problem with that. I do have a problem, though, when politicians, corporations, NGOs, and outside agitators influx the amount of newcomers coming into Canada and play us all like fools, including the immigrants. They're exploiting everybody in this process. So in her article here, she says, when Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre asked if I would serve as the shadow minister for immigration, I'll admit to feeling some initial reluctance. I chalked that up to knowing what was being asked of me, having served in this role for the start of the Liberal government in 2015 until early 2020, the impact of this policy file and the amount of effort it takes to get the policy right is not lost on me. Managing it as a government minister or an opposition critic requires a substantial lift. That's because the delicate consensus supporting Canada's pluralism can quickly fray without careful and wise handling of federal immigration policy. Unfortunately for Canada, putting it mildly, the successful Liberal ministers who have helmed this file over the past decade have not executed such wisdom. Without exception, all of them abandoned the fundamental principles that have long sustained Canadian public support for immigration. Do not admit more newcomers than the country can house, provide health care and jobs for, or culturally integrate, and do not create conditions in which Canada's immigration system can be easily gamed. Sounds like stuff I would agree on. And again, I'm pro-immigrant. I'm not against people coming here to seek better life. I am, however, for checks and balances. Because if we don't have checks and balances, if we don't have border security, you don't have a country. You don't have a country. The consequences of the Liberals' failures on this front have been stark. A housing crisis, record-breaking healthcare wait times, suppressed wages, job losses, youth unemployment, rampant fraud and abuse, and heightened tensions between communities. Their mismanagement has fractured the political discourse too. On one extreme, profiteers and partisans will deny any issues exist at all, often labeling critics of the Liberals' juiced immigration levels as anti-immigrant or worse. On the other, some now reject pluralism altogether. Caught in the middle are millions of Canadians who support immigration in principle, but grapple with a Liberal-created reality of soaring housing costs, scarce jobs, and strained access to healthcare and services. They watch as their government does things like consider buying hotels to house asylum claimants while their rents spiral out of control. Most don't blame the immigrants who come to Canada for these problems, but they do blame the Liberal government for whose policies led them to this place. They should be offered solutions, not more arrivals, until these challenges are addressed. And so massive reform is needed. But the question that first went through my mind after being asked to serve on the file again was, is reform even possible under this government? My skepticism is rooted in my previous experience on the file, having watched the Liberals give a proverbial middle finger to any constructive proposal to get immigration on the right path. As early as months into Liberals' post-2015 election win, problems with their approach to immigration quickly became apparent. In response, I mounted vigorous campaigns to stop the Liberals from lifting the visa requirements for Mexican nationals, knowing that doing so would result in a flood of bogus asylum claims. I spent years pressing the government to close the loophole in the safe third country agreement for the same reason. I pushed the government to keep the female genital mutilation listed. I pushed the government to keep female genital mutilation listed in the citizenship guide as an apparent practice, knowing how important it was to promote gender equality as a cultural norm to newcomers. I prosecuted the rampant fraud in the temporary foreign workers program to prevent the human exploitation that comes along accompanying it. But no matter the effort, the response from the liberals was the same, no change. And the implication that criticism of failing policy was somehow tantamount to racism. So, yeah, if you were criticizing this, if you had any concerns as a Canadian citizen, even if you're an immigrant yourself, because I know a lot of immigrants are concerned about this. They're concerned about mass migration and all these newcomers that didn't have to go through the processes that legal immigrants, people that have worked their way to become permanent residents or temporary Canadian citizens, these asylum seekers, these migrants, didn't have to go through those processes. And anyone that criticized that were deemed a racist. By who? The Liberal government. The people that are exploiting these people. The ones that are making race-baiting claims. The people that are responsible for this. And it's done all by design. So, fast forward to today, nearly a decade after my prior Cassandra-like experience as the critic-in-chief of the Liberals' immigration policies, despite a decade of effort on my and fellow Conservatives' efforts to push for the Liberals to reform their immigration policies, much credit to Tom Kimmick, the Liberals have insisted upon juicing them instead. They've done this whole simultaneously pursuing economic policies that have lowered economic growth and increased inflation. They've polarized the debate on these issues to the point where even liberal partisans, they are stepping out with constructive advice. The result is millions of people about to have no legal reason to be in Canada, a housing crisis, a burgeoning healthcare wait times, concerns about looming job crisis, cultural tensions, and a never-before-seen in Canada skepticism about immigration. As far as I can tell, the Liberals still have no intention of undertaking major reform to the file because their actions have left them without an easy path to get there, even if they want to. So, that says a lot. That says a lot. And that's why even when Justin Trudeau and former immigration minister Mark Miller, when they came forward and said, hey, we screwed up, we're going to take this temporary pause, I didn't have the full force of belief to actually recognize that, because I know in the back of their mind and within Parliament, within the corrupted party of the Liberal establishment, that they're going to fast track mass migration no matter what. Because it's not about Canada, it's not about our interests, it's about the interest of the Century Initiative, about the WEF's agenda. It's the initiatives of the billionaire class that exploit our immigration legislation to exploit these people, bring them into our country, dangle a carrot in front of their nose by saying, hey, we'll give you a job, we'll give you some temporary housing, we'll give you a little bit of perks for the damage that we've done to your communities, because most of the asylum seekers come from war-torn nations that we've been involved in. So we'll give you some damage control on that, but we're going to use you and abuse you for cheap labor. We're going to take your money for taxes. We're going to exploit you for votes, and we're going to create a crisis in lots of Canadian towns and cities that have never had crises before. We're going to throw them into small communities that don't have the services to meet the needs of this new coming population. And you know who also agrees with this? Who's also an immigrant themselves? Mario Zelia, the famous TikTok influencer researcher. Mario Zelia is an immigrant and went through the checks and balances, and he agrees with those statements there, that we need reform, that mass migration is out of control. So he did this video here stating Angus Reid poll. Half of Canadians now believe mass deportations are necessary to stop unauthorized migration. Why? Because 1 in 10 people in this country are temporary residents, and over 500,000 are set to lose their visas this year. 500,000 are about to lose their visas. And legally, by our immigration status, as far as I'm aware of, unless they change the legislation once again to pitch to this, but legally, when they're about to lose their visas, they have options. They can either go back to their country, go out of Canada, they can apply for citizenship, or they could try to reapply for a different visa. But because a lot of these people that are coming into the country from, NGOs, from fraudulent documents, all the claims that we have seen over the years, it's illegal that they're here. It's illegal that they're here. And again, as someone that is on the side of the migrants, because I don't blame them for being part of this exploitation nature, I blame the companies, I blame the governments, I blame the whole establishment that brought us to this point, and we need a total reform from the top down. Because otherwise, it's going to get even more devastating, bring in more people when there's a job crisis, when there's a housing epidemic, when things are already getting out of control. You're seeing crime sprees happening all across, big metropolitan areas. And I'm not saying that migrants are all criminals. I'm saying that when you have this influx of population and people are already paranoid, that's a dangerous mix. So here's Mario Zelia discussing how Canadians want mass migration. Canadians. And I know some people say, well, that sounds like an American thing. That sounds like a Trump thing. How dare you get your information from America? Those xenophobic, racist people like Trump and the border wall. Well, turns out a lot of countries feel the exact same way. Regardless of where you're from, regardless of where you're coming from, and what news you subscribe to, what side of the aisle you are on politics. A lot of people understand that this is exploitive to the T for this exact nature and want something done about this. So listen to this.
Canada has a massive immigration problem. We have millions of visas expiring in Canada, and nearly half of all Canadians believe that mass deportations are necessary to stop the unauthorized immigration that's coming into the country. And the immigration minister that created this mess, Mark Miller, he said we didn't turn down the taps fast enough. That's the admission of the Liberal government opening up Canada to millions of immigrants, 3 million in just 3 years. And as many of you know, I've been covering this for years, and I've said it before, and it's finally making it to mainstream media where our infrastructure can't keep up with the population demand. And despite warnings, many guest workers, temporary workers, and international students are in many ways showing that they have no intention of leaving the country when their visas expire. Mark Miller admitted that something needs to be done, but they're relying on people leaving voluntarily. Now, the Conservative government got information from the Immigration Department, and they said that the number of temporary visas...
I love how they say, I love the excuse of, Mark Miller and Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government to say that, oh, we hoped our way out of this immigration mess was that they were going to leave voluntarily. After dragging them in, after paying them hotel rooms, after, dangling a job in front of their nose to exploit the Canadian workers so you can send the jobs off to the migrants for cheap labor, we're hoping our way out is that they just leave voluntarily. Which, oddly enough, surprisingly enough, a lot of migrants that thought Canada was this, great developed nation are actually leaving voluntarily. They're not staying in Canada because they realize that Canada is primarily a shithole. And that's coming from a Canadian. It's not well. It doesn't do well for us Canadians. It's not doing well for the immigrants. It's not doing well for the migrants. So a lot of people are just, there's no reason to stay here.
That are going to expire in 2025 is 4.9 million. More than 1 out of every 10 residents in Canada is going to have their visa expire this year. Now, the federal government won't admit to that huge number, but they've acknowledged that the visas of 500,000 temporary migrants have already ended, and they haven't left the country. Meanwhile, the CBSA, the Canada Border Service Agency, they have a wanted list of 30,000 people, and they have no idea where these people are. Now, there was an economist that Justin Trudeau brought in to discuss the special migration update. His name's Mike Moffat, and he said that the number of people on temporary visas should gradually be reduced to just 1 million, that we currently have way too much with the over 4 million people in the country, and that would reduce Canada's population growth rate to 0.
So, you can see in the article here that they brought on this economist, Mike Moffat, who pledged with Justin Trudeau for this mass migration. Again, Mark Miller revealed the game early on that one of the reasons they brought a huge amount of migrants into the country with fraudulent visas is because during COVID, when everything was locked down, when businesses were shut down, when people's livelihoods were pretty much jeopardized, they brought in these migrants to perform the tasks left out by Canadians' workforce because they were told to lock down. And they brought in the migrants to fill in the positions at the workforce and claimed that they had to do this to keep the economy afloat. Otherwise, COVID would have led us into a recession, which we were anyway. We were already in a recession. We were already in a complete lockdown during COVID. But they brought foreigners who we don't even know are vaccinated. We don't know any status about them. Bring them in to Canada, throw them into the job positions that were temporarily laid off because of COVID, because of the restrictions, and they did because they want to secure the economy to make themselves look good. That's why. That's why this is happening. This is where the great replacement theory comes in. It's not just to make it a race-baiting issue. It's the fact that they want to replace the already standing Canadian workforce that had worked endlessly, that used to, sustain a good income, that was able to provide for a family, keep a roof over that. They want to replace that with cheap labor until the point that an AI robot will eventually replace the migrants. And when all that gets replaced, what are you going to do with the population? What are you going to do with the migrants? What are you going to do with all the newcomers that you brought in exploitively for cheap labor, knowing that they are just the buffer between the Canadian workforce and AI technology? What are you going to do then? What are you going to do then? They got nothing. They got nothing.
Especially since it's been running at more than 3% each year. Think of the whole city of Markham and nearly the whole city of Vaughan. Maybe slightly less than that. But those two combined, imagine all of those people having their visas expire. That's how many people are in the country on a temporary basis and have no intention of leaving. And to top it all off, Canada took in 817,000 new immigrants in the first 4 months of 2025. Unreal.
So, like I said, I had this hunch that it was going to happen regardless, because who's really in control of Parliament? Who's really in control? Because we knew it wasn't Justin Trudeau. A drama teacher that barely passed college, that skipped a grade, that could barely speak, was definitely not in control of Canada. And instead, who's really in control of the country is the oligarchs that are mastering the art of politics, the art of manipulation, the art of wokeism, the whole creation of segregating people and shaming people if they're not on board with it. It's all part of this manufactured narrative, all part of this manufacturing to go against the whims of Canadians, to go after their sovereignty, to completely erase their individuality as a nation and push people into this kind of society where you're just going to bring in more migrants. You're going to try to incorporate them into struggling towns and cities, telling people they have to get along, they have to deal with this. And once they exploit the migrants for cheap labor, once that's over with, they're going to be replaced by robots. And at that point, everyone's going to become a technological, fearless slave to the system that continues to exploit them. And that's now what Mark Carney is doing. So Mark Carney was not for change. Mark Carney is not elbows up. He's not a defiant force for Canada. He's a voice for the global establishment that is increasing this. Not making it better, but he wants to increase it. He's Trudeau, the next generation. And people adore this incarnation of Trudeau because he's more elegant. He talks with a more poise as a politician compared to Justin Trudeau. So they're able to get away with something like this.